Hello, and welcome to the RedeeM podcast, where we help you reverse your story. We do this by helping you integrate tragedy, we help you redeem heartache, and we help you move into flourishing in life. So that when you know your story, all those things are able to come together, and your story ends up being written to tell a good ending and not a tragic one. Today I'm continuing the conversation that I had started about the spiritual gifts from Romans chapter 12 that list out the 7 spiritual gifts, and they equate to the first 7 days of creation and the last 7 letters to the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands and the 7 stars that are in God's right hand, or something like that. I know that I think the lampstand is representative of the church. I believe the 7 stars are representative of it also. I don't remember. I have to go back and look. Either way, today we are talking about the second of the gifts, which is the gift of the servant. And day one creation, I will read the Genesis account. So this is the servant. Day 2, and God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate the waters from the waters." So God made the expanse and separated the waters beneath it from the waters above, and it was so. God called the expanse sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. Okay. How in the wide world do I get servant out of that? Well, I don't. The Bible does. And it's also pretty consistent with what I see in people and how they're motivated to live their lives. So, other people have explored this idea, and it seems tied to so the word servant, like, what do you picture when you hear that word? Like, for me, I picture a king who has subjects, and some of those subjects are servants, and their whole job is to do the king's wishes and the king's bidding and the king's desires. They serve him. What's interesting about that is, if you think about a servant, like what a servant is to a king, I definitely think about the activity that goes into service. But how does that equate to this notion of day 2 that we read in Genesis of God creating the sky? How does this make sense? Well, I would say that without the sky, without the air, we would not have life. We would not have a place to live. So the sky gives life to all living beings. The sky gives life to the trees and the plants, as well as to human beings. And I would go so far to extrapolate that and also say that servants bring the king life. Without the servants, the king's bidding and the king's wishes do not get done, and the kingdom does not operate. So this means that servants are attending to the needs and desires of the king. And this is what you will consistently find with people who have this type of gifting. They consistently are drawn to meet people's needs and to create life-giving spaces. want you to think about that. Life-giving spaces. And then their church is the church in Smyrna. So this is fast forwarding to Revelation and the 7 churches. So with the church in Smyrna, this is what the Apostle John writes. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write the words of the first and the last who died and came to life. I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich, and the slander of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, to the one who overcomes, will not be hurt by the second death. So this is the letter to the servants. And here's what's very interesting about the story of the servants. They seem to attract dishonor. And here's what I mean by that. I know those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. I know your tribulation and your poverty, and the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not. So this is also a very interesting thing about the servant gift. They tend to not build lots of wealth. But the healed servants, they will generate an abundance and richness of life that very few will ever experience. So, and then with that also comes this tribulation and slander. And they seem to have a disproportionate amount of suffering than some of the other gifts. I'm not saying that's consistent across the board. I'm just saying as an archetype, as a story, from the servants that I know, they tend to have it pretty rough. But here again, you see the promise from Jesus, be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. And so there it is again, this notion that the atmosphere provides life, oxygen to everyone, and servants provide life to the king. They are usually people who do things. They're not usually connected with what they're feeling. And because of the tribulation and because of the suffering, their tendency is to not be faithful unto death. And what do I mean by that? I mean that they will tend towards fawning when there is tribulation and suffering, or when there is conflict, or when there is pain. And it's not natural for us to want to go through pain. I mean, anyone who wants to go through pain, I think, probably has some problems. But as a Christian, you can approach pain differently than many other people. And I mean, even people who aren't Christians have begun to realize this, that there's a benefit in going through painful situations in order to grow your character and your competence to get to a better end result. Well, the thing about servants is that they will, in the midst of conflict or tribulation, they will tend to do whatever they will say or do whatever they have to do to not be in the tribulation, to not be in the suffering. And that's where their story needs redeeming. And if you get a servant to go through the process of redemptive suffering, you can get a servant who's able to come out on the other side more like Jesus and is able to provide life in service to other people because they themselves have suffered, and so then they will be able to more readily be able to identify the needs of others. So, their birthright from Revelation is to wear a crown of life. They bring life to broken families, they bring life to leaders, and they help cleanse lands that are broken. Because they're like the atmosphere. Oxygen and the air has a purifying effect. O3, what do they call that? Ozone. Ozone is a purifying compound. They use it to purify water, interestingly enough, in distilled water, as well as also like mineral and spring water. The lie that they struggle with is I'm legitimate when I build a platform of success under others. And so again, that's this idea of meeting needs and serving people. Like, if I'm able to support and hold people up and meet their needs when they have them and serve them and create life-giving spaces so that people can live in that atmosphere, that's the legitimacy lie. That is where shame has come in and wounded their gift and their calling. And so then it's attached to this idea of, well, people might slander me if I don't meet their needs. Like, people will probably ridicule me, and I don't want to go through the suffering, and I don't want to go through the pain, and I don't want to go through any kind of death. So I am going to do everything. I'm going to meet everyone's needs. And so I'm going to be hyper vigilant and anticipate what do they need, and I will work to meet that. The battlefield. This is an interesting one. Mindset of victimization. Feeling like a victim rather than a victor. And again, this is this idea of redemptive suffering. That servants who... So you've got this suffering, you've got poverty from Revelation chapter 2. I know your poverty, I know your tribulation, and I know the slanders of the leaders, the Jews, those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Behold, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and for 10 days you will have tribulation. Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers will not be hurt by the second death. And so this is the bind of the servant. But if the servant is able to sit in the midst of tribulation, in the midst of poverty, and in the midst of the slander, grieve the heartache, be angry over the injustice, and see how shame is working to enslave them to illegitimacy and working to enslave them to coping strategies to meet everyone's need constantly and burn out and not have energy and life to give to others because they have constantly bled themselves out. If you get a servant to go through their healing journey and to heal their wound, you will get a servant who is able to bring a beautiful oxygen to organizations, leaders, and spaces even. So here's some things to note about servants. Their major weaknesses. They have a battle for self-worth. They don't see their innate value or believe God's truth about themselves or their call. They have tons of worry and anxiety because they take on other people's problems and then they worry about them, constantly trying to figure out and anticipate, what is this person going to need? This is another one. And because they're so anticipatory of people's needs and they take ownership of those things, they can become codependent and enablers. They do a task instead of teaching others to do it and releasing them to do it. So, here's some qualities and descriptions of servants. Oh, and here's another very interesting thing about servants. They have like an innate purity about themselves towards authority, which I thought was very interesting as I was learning this. That you will not find a servant, at least I haven't met one yet, who will abuse their authority. They're very, they're quite pure in their motives when it comes to authority. So God will give them more authority than normal people, than your average Joe. That's something that I will see. People will give them more responsibility because they can tell that they're not in it for the power grab. They will use their power and authority or that position to bring life and meet people's needs. As long as they're relatively healed, because it can go in the negative direction where they use it to prop up their self-worth, constantly worrying about other people's problems and making sure they meet those needs and enabling other people to do it. So here are those qualities. They see external needs of comfort and food and is quick to meet those needs. So true. They are a team player. Yes, is relatively free from the desire to build their own kingdom. So true. Is very practical. Like they will even help other people build their kingdoms. So in particular, we'll get to the ruler later in day 6. But the ruler or the leader, they are attracted to the ruler and the leader because the ruler is called to build. That's one of their callings, to build the kingdom up. And servants are attracted to that because it's activity and it's serving the king to further the king's goals and desires and needs. So you will typically find some type of a servant paired with someone who has a predominant gift of ruler. They are committed to the present moment to meet present needs. They have difficult saying no to competing demands. So let me back up. is very practical, is committed to the present moment to meet present needs. From what I have seen in servants, they don't have a tendency to be very future-oriented. They don't have a tendency to be very plan-oriented because they're very much about the here and now and making sure that the needs are met and the tasks are being done. They have difficult saying no to competing demands, usually overcommitted in scheduling. Very true. Finds it hard to accept excellence in their work, to affirm themselves, or to receive affirmation from others. They tend to find something to apologize for when serving others. They also have a tendency to see the best in others, and they actually overlook and are blind to how people use them or abuse them, which is where kind of this whole idea of dishonor comes from and the slander. It's very sad what they will tolerate from other people in the pursuit of getting their self-worth from meeting people's needs. Again, attracts dishonor, especially in the home, tends to be the one who is talked down to and has jokes made about them. They can be competitive in areas that are considered safe, such as games or children's sports teams. Oh my goodness, that is very true. I've seen that quality. Otherwise, dedicated to seeing others succeed more than themselves. They have purity of motive. They're straightforward, honest, and can be trusted. Can be in a very toxic environment without getting personally corrupted. And they're very low maintenance. They don't strive. They're not trying to set the world on fire. They're not trying to become the best at any particular thing, unless they have the supporting gifts, which will be another topic. But for the most part, these are the qualities. So, if you have identified with any of these things, I would invite you to work with me or work with my wife. You can go to RedeeMLLC.com and sign up for a free consultation. But otherwise, this is an example of something that you have been given by God as an image bearer of Him, that the enemy has assaulted your story in some way, shape, or form. And for you to flourish in life and for you to have your story reversed, you need to go through the process of redemptive suffering, of redeeming heartache, of integrating your tragedy so that you can take ownership of that gift and allow the gift to then go out and do what it was called and made to do. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the RedeeM podcast. Thank you for watching or listening.